This is Ken Himmler, and I wanted to join you today because, as the title says, how did I lose $19 million in real estate? Well, for most of you that have read any of my books, there was one published in, let's say, 2006 called Live Rich, Stay Wealthy for Women Only. And then there was another one in 2016, Live Rich, Stay Wealthy, The Total Retirement Freedom. And in those books, I explained how I've lost $19 million in real estate. And let me give you the premise to this. So when I was 17 years old, I started reading. I got really interested in real estate. And believe it or not, that was back in the days when Trump had written The Art of the Deal. And I read that and got really excited as a 17-year-old. And then I went on to 18 years old and I read everything Carlton Sheets had on the no money down deal. And then at 17, maybe 18 years old, there was a guy, I can't remember the guy's name, it was Russell something, and he had all these infomercials going on TV. And I took every last dime that I had to buy his no money down deal. So through those deals, I started learning how to negotiate with sellers. It ended up that I had bought, I think it was 16 or 17 units initially. And keep in mind, I was broke at 18 years old, completely broke. And most of the deals were negotiations with the sellers to share an equity or do nothing down and then give them a much bigger sale price upon rehab. Some of them were FHA Fannie Mae loans. And all of those deals were different. There was not one standard deal. And every time somebody says to me, well, I don't have enough money for a down payment to buy into real estate or rental property, I always tell them you don't need anything other than your wits and some education and really a lot of drive because there is that thing called the BRRRR: buy, rehab, rent, refinance. That's a methodology that I didn't learn until later because in all of those how to buy real estate with nothing down, all that they really talked about was how to buy the real estate and how to own it, right? But there was nothing around back in the early 80s on, well, what do you do with it once you buy it, right? There was no courses on how do you manage real estate or how do you rehab it with free money, because that's another one that we'll talk about too. Is that all that was how to buy it. So all of a sudden now I'm buying all this real estate. I'm 18, 19 years old. I have no idea what I'm doing at all. And so I had gotten ripped off more times than you can believe. I mean, I'll tell you some of the stories so that you can understand what it was like getting in there. So initially, when I bought one house, it was in New York, Buffalo, New York, Massachusetts Avenue. Never forget this thing. It had something like 4 or 5 units in it, and one of the units was occupied by a super nice guy, but a complete con artist. So at 18 years old, you don't have your wherewithal of the world. You don't know how to kind of vet people out or how to trust them. And this is what I tell everybody: look, real estate is not a passive investment. It is a business. It's no different than opening up a donut shop or auto mechanic shop or anything else. You got bricks and mortar, right? It's not an online. You got bricks and mortar, meaning you have a piece of property with a structure with electrical, plumbing, HVAC, painting, roof, all that kind of fun stuff. And to top that off, you also have all these rules and regulations depending upon where you live. Now, my unfortunate fact is I bought all these properties in New York, the most tenant protected state, maybe next to California, not knowing anything at all. So my first rental experience of, boy, do I have a lot to learn, was this guy at Massachusetts Avenue refused to pay his rent. And I'd go and knock on his door. He's like, "Oh man, I don't have any rent. My family didn't. I didn't get my Section 8 housing. I didn't get my Section 8 housing check. We didn't get our food stamps or whatever." Another reason why that I didn't understand is that it really depends upon not just location, but what is the demographic of the person you're actually going to rent to. And so he would just give me excuse after excuse after excuse. And so finally I said, "Look," I don't remember his name, but I said, I came into his house and all of a sudden, all I see are all these new Nintendos or whatever it was back then. I don't even remember what it was. It was probably an Atari. That was right when big giant screen TVs were coming out. Man, they had gold on their wrists and gold on their neck, and they had all this money tied up in stuff that they were buying. So I started thinking to myself, wait a minute, they have rent. They're buying all this other stuff. That's their choice. But unfortunately, I wasn't educated enough to really understand that they were ripping me off. They were keeping the rent. So finally, after 3 months, I think it was 3 months, that was a long time ago. So after 3 months, I said, look, you have to get out, either get out or pay the rent. And so I learned their little rental tricks. So I filed an eviction notice, and then they were set to come into the court to be evicted. Well, 2 days beforehand, all of a sudden I get a notice from the Department of Housing, the housing inspector. So the housing inspector was called out because guess what they did? They threw rocks through the windows. Now they were smart. They did it from the outside so that the glass went inside to make it look like it wasn't their fault. And the housing inspector came out and he wrote me up. So he writes me up for this long thing that I had these broken windows. Now the rules are they can't be evicted while in process of being a violation of housing. So I go fix the windows, but now court date is now moved forward. Okay, so now what happens is I go back in, I refile the eviction notice because you got to refile it now because you got to cancel it because of the housing department. So I refile the eviction notice. 3 days beforehand, I get another housing inspection notice. So all of a sudden now there's trash all over the front yard. Wonder who put all that there, right? And so I go out, I pick up all the trash, I got to refile the eviction notice. Third time is all of a sudden there's leaky pipes. It looks like somebody hit it with, a hammer to make it leak. Now I've got a destroyed floor, I've got a housing violation. And here's what's really interesting is in Buffalo, New York, at least at that time, there were what's called housing violation landlords. So you're ranked. Well, now keep in mind, I had probably 35 to 40 units at that time, and they were all in this kind of neighborhood. I had bought them all with little or no cash, which means they needed a lot of repairs. And so these tenants knew exactly how to scam the system. And I started getting killed because I can't pay the mortgage payments because they're not paying the rents. And so you have to go through this whole learning process, right? Of how do I vet out a tenant? How do I make sure they're the right tenant? How do I make sure that the repairs are done? How do I make sure I'm not in any liability? So, giving another example of that, I had three houses burned down. Two of them were arson. One of them was undetermined. One of them that was arson is because one of the tenants in one of the floors was really upset. Well, no, the bottom tenant was really upset with the upper tenant. So believe it or not, they poured gasoline on it on the floor. They took their kids out and they lit the house on fire, almost killing everybody in another floor. Now, this was my first experience with implied liability because all of a sudden the arson fire people, the investigators, are investigating me. I wasn't even in town. Literally, I was in another state at the time that it happened. That was a fun experience. And finally, they recognized who did it. They arrested her. She did time in jail. Her kids got, put with foster. It was a horrible situation. But you learn through all these processes that this is a business. And unlike, say, a bagel shop, where somebody walks in, they order something, they leave, your liability is mainly with slip and falls, maybe with the food quality, and certainly with employees. In rental properties, it's a lot of different things. It's the batteries in the smoke detector. It is, the tenants that you leave in there. And now that some of these squatter laws have been unveiled or exposed, if you want to use that word, now people are actually seeing the risks of actually buying real estate. Now, I'm not saying because I'm an avid real estate investor. I love real estate, love going in there and redoing things and seeing the potential in something. But boy, was that a hard lesson. I think a lot of people have gone through that. They buy things for Airbnb, they buy things because they read something online. And I had these thoughts of grandeur of, wow, would I be the next, real estate mogul? No, I had so much to learn at 18 years old. So I struggled through that. I got beat up. I was in court probably two, three times a week. Now, keep in mind, I was still a financial planner at 18 years old, right? I got an internship at 18 years old. So here I am. I'm working 60, 70 hours a week, and then I'm trying to do real estate at 10 p.m. and on the weekends. It was a grind. And so I recognized that there's no way that I was going to keep my internship as a financial planner and continue to buy and rent real estate. So I started hiring people. Again, big lesson, right? I made so many mistakes. I had tools stolen, supplies stolen, storerooms that we rented, what that we used within our rental property. So, say there was a house at, I think it was 208 Vermont Street in Buffalo, and it was 4 stories. The top story was an attic. So I stored all of my materials, whether it's whatever it was, nails or tools or whatever, to rehab the properties. And that got broken into and everything got wiped out. See, I learned along the way. I'm not criticizing this, but boy, when you get into real estate, you really got to understand what your risks are. So now I'm 20, 21 years old, maybe 3 years into this, and now I got this down. I felt like, okay, I got it down. I know how to buy these properties, I know how to rehab them. Now here's where, and I know how to rent them, but in the BRRR phraseology, and Grant Cardone uses this. It's a different way of looking at it. He says it's the exit, no exit strategy. So here's how I lost $19 million. So now I've got, I don't know what it was back then, maybe 35, 40 units, something like that. It was good, right? And it was producing a good income. But I looked at the scalability and I thought to myself, how do I scale up and make more money with the workload? Because at that time, it was still, even though I'd hired 9 people, some of them were part time, some of them were full time, to manage these properties. These are repairs, rental pickups, representing me in what do you call it? Eviction court, housing court, all the fun stuff that goes with that stuff. And so I thought, okay, I'm still spending a lot of time, but maybe I didn't build this correctly. Well, looking back, I absolutely did not build this correctly. When people say to me, well, I just want to buy maybe a 1 unit, maybe a 2 unit house, biggest mistake you can ever make. The reason is it will take you just as much time and you take on as much risk and as much energy with you as you do with a 1 unit, as you do with a 20, 30, 40, 50 unit. And if you're really smart about it, you buy 100 doors, right? 100 units, because the cash flow from those 100 units can support all of the management and you can step back. And once you get it organized, it's never truly passive. See, the definition of passive is like a dividend. You go buy J&J stock, or you go buy, I don't know, I'm trying, AT&T. That's not a recommendation to go buy that, but they just crank out their dividends. They put the dividends in your account, and all of a sudden you're like, hey, that was pretty passive. Rental property, I don't care how it's structured, it will never be passive. Like any business, you can involve yourself and get completely de-energized by the business, or you hire really good people. But in order to hire really good people, you got this bell curve, right? You got to be able to get enough income in there and enough profit in there to be able to hire those people. And that's always that chicken and egg. Do I hire the person before so I can make more money, or do I make some money so I can hire a person? And that's different for everybody. But the point is, real estate is never passive. Don't buy into that. I did when I was 8, 17, 18, 19. I was much more gullible back then than, almost cranking on 60 years old. So it's not passive. Let's clear that up. So once I started looking at this, I'm like, wow, I got all these units. What am I going to do with this? Like, how am I going to add on another 50 units, 100 units, 200 units? I didn't have the concept of 100 doors. Grant Cardone talks about this. There's a ton of people in the real estate space that talk about this. So I said, well, maybe I'll sell this thing. Maybe I'll sell and then I'll restart. Right. Okay. So now we're talking in the 80s. Now let's go back. No internet, no cell phone, no sense of privacy. Now that means that back then you could walk in a county clerk's office and you could record a deed and they don't even ask you for ID. You could call up a mortgage company. There weren't even recorded lines back then. And you'd say, well, hey, this is Ken Himmler. I'm changing my address and I'm changing my phone number, whatever it is, and they would do it. Now you got to go through all the security checks. They got to make sure it's you. But that wasn't the case back then. So let me explain what happened. So I met this guy at the gym, always been a gym rat, and he knew my best friend and my best friend's father. So at that time, Joe Lazaro Sr. was a past Mr. Universe winner, like in the 60s, something like that. He was awesome. And then Joe, his son, was my friend from hockey. A guy named Mike Zarowski was also, I believe he either won or he didn't win, whatever it was. But what happened was he got a drug addiction. Well, at least, this is what he told me. I mean, whether that's absolute fact or not, I do not know. But here's how it all played out. So I know he came up to me one day in the gym and said, "Hey, I heard you have a bunch of rental properties. I really want to get into the rental property business." I said, "Well, that's kind of convenient because I was going to actually sell all these properties as a package." Now, to keep in mind, now we're talking like 1984, 1985. And back then, I think the total value of those properties, total, all the units, was like 450 to $500,000. Not a lot of money in today's dollars. Back then, I thought it was a lot more valuable. Not valuable. It was at an 18, 19, 20-year-old kid. I thought I had hit the jackpot. I was making money every month on it. So we went to a lawyer, and the lawyer says, "Why don't you do a land contract?" I said, "Well, I'm young at this. What is a land contract?" He says, "Well, because most of your properties have these Freddie Mac, Fannie Mae, FHA mortgages, they're not, some of them are assumable, some of them are not assumable. So what you can do is, instead of going through all that time and expense, we can wrap it into what's one massive land contract." So again, I didn't know what that was. So I said, "Okay, let's do it." He's a lawyer, right? He's got to know what he's doing. He's got to be in my best interest. He's got to think through every angle. Nope. Didn't tell me anything about what was about to transpire. So here I am, 2021. I'm like, this is great. I love real estate. I am just going to go buy a 100-door building after this and reset and rethink. And then I can fully hire managers. I don't have to do any of that work myself. I'll just be the finance guy, right? So the deal with Mike was he'd give me a small down payment. It was something like 3 grand, 2 grand, something really, really small. Then we would do a land contract and we would wrap everything into that land contract. And so the way the land contract works is I have a contract with him. He is now technically the owner. He could go and redeed the properties, or he could just sit back and pay the mortgages. And when the mortgages were paid off, he could sell the properties. He is the rightful owner under that contract. However, what the lawyer never explained to me was, because I formally assumed the FHA mortgages in that small, small, small print, they were still in my name, which I didn't think through that well enough. You don't really think through these things at 17, 18, 19 years old, or 20. And so I sell the properties, right? Well, through the land contract. It's not a formal sale like an escrow and closing and adjustments. Basically, he's agreed to buy the properties, and I've agreed to sell that to him under the land contract, but the mortgages stay in my name. So his agreement, and again, this is where my complete immaturity came out, my lack of experience, my lack of knowing who I was working with. I think Warren Buffett said it the best. If he doesn't like working with somebody and if he doesn't trust them, he will do no business with them at all. You're 18, 19 years old. I'm like, man, I'm cashing in. This is the jackpot. I can move on. Holy cow, I'm gonna crank it, right? So your profit eyes overwhelm logic. Although I'd probably say at that age, I wouldn't even have the cognizance to even say, hey, this is everything that could go wrong. So I do the land contract. Mike takes over. I don't know how long it was. Maybe 6 months, maybe 9 months. And he was responsible for picking up the rents, making the mortgage payments, and then sending me my sale payment, my override over the difference of what I owed versus what he bought. So 6 months, 9 months go by. Everything's just going great. I'm getting this. I don't remember what it was. I want to probably say back then, maybe 2, 3 grand a month. I'm guessing, but it's probably somewhere in that range. And it's great. I'm like, this is amazing. And so now I'm out there looking for a much bigger piece of real estate. I'm looking for a lot of doors. I even was talking in downtown Buffalo on the corner of Delaware and let's see, wasn't Allen. It was one street south of there. There was this empty lot, and I was talking to developers about building like this 30-story building, and you know, going big, right? So now we've got the plans. I paid for architectural plans on the base. I'm talking to developers. I'm talking to banks. I'm all excited. And maybe 6 months, 9 months, again, that was 40 years ago, goes by. And all of a sudden, Mike calls me up and says, "Hey, man, listen, I'm running into some real rental issues. I'm having to do a lot of repairs, and I just don't have the cash flow to give you for your override. How about if I defer it? And what I'll do is once I get these repairs and these things re-rented, this is the story he gave me. Then what I'll do is I'll catch up with you. 18, 20 years old, whatever. I'm like, oh, sure. Of course I should trust you. Of course oh yeah, whatever you say is true, right? Here's my mistake. One, I never actually dug into the granularity of it and said, hey, Mike, show me exactly what properties are not paying. Show me exactly what properties are paying. Show me exactly what's going on. I just took him on his word. So I said, okay, so now 3, 4 months go by. 3, 4 months go by, and I'm not getting my override check. And maybe it was 11, 12 months into the deal. And I get this knock on the door. And I look through the little thing, the window on the side. I'm living in a house in Lancaster, uh, outside of Buffalo. It's a suburb. And all of a sudden, there's an Erie County sheriff at the door. And I'm like, oh my gosh, somebody I know died. That's the first thought that went through my mind. Like, wow, like this just weight goes over you. So I open the door sheepishly. I'm like waiting for the really bad news. He says, "Are you Kenneth Himmler?" I'm like, yes, I am. And I'm waiting for this. He goes, hands me a piece of paper, goes, "You've been served." I went, wait, what? What does that mean? I've never been served. So apparently, here's how this all played out. And then I can tell you how I lost $19 million. So I'm looking at this lawsuit in the middle of the night, and here's what basically happened. Or according to Mike, he developed a drug habit. He put all the money that he was collecting from the rents into his drug habit, so he couldn't pay me. It wasn't that he had repairs to do. He had some kind of addiction. Or at least this is what he told me. How do I prove that that's really what happened other than maybe spending the money? I don't know. Either way, he didn't pay me. Either way, what he did was he called up the mortgage companies. He said, hey, my name is Ken Himmler. And he legally changed the mailing address, the phone number, everything. So I had no idea the mortgages weren't getting paid because I'm sitting there going, well, the mortgages are my name. He's making the mortgage payments. I'm not getting any notice. He literally fraudulently changed the name and the number of all those documents. Okay, so now I'm like 6 months behind on all the mortgages. So I'm like, holy cow. So immediately I go back and I talk to this lawyer that does the land contract, the same one that recommended it to me. He says, well, sorry, yeah, that's a risk you take if the mortgages are under your name. I'm like, why didn't you tell me that to begin with? You didn't ask. How do I know what to ask, right? So this is the problem when you get advice. It really depends upon the quality of the advice and are they looking at all angles of risks, upsides, downsides, all those different things. He didn't tell me any of that stuff. So anyway, now I'm at a pickle. So I call up the mortgage companies. Mortgage companies say, okay, we can work something out with you where you can catch up on the mortgage payments. It'll still destroy your credit, but because they were in your name, but we'll give you this option to catch up. I'm like, great. So we have Mike, we file foreclosure against Mike against the land contract, which actually was kind of easy. It wasn't a formal foreclosure. It was basically he violated the land contract, the agreement. And so now they come back into my possession. So now I'm like, okay, here we go. I'm going to go take these over. I'll find somebody else to buy them to. Not so simple. So now I go out and I start looking at these rental properties. 90% of them had become vacant. Why? Mike was not doing any repairs. He wasn't doing anything. So here's how bad it got. So I go into some of these vacant apartments. And unfortunately, what he did was he ravaged them. He took anything out that he could, whether it was porcelain, whether it was copper, whatever it was, he stole it out of those properties. Why? He sold it. I don't know if he, again, what he told me was he had a cocaine addiction. Okay, maybe he did, maybe he didn't. Who knows? That's what he told me. So I went with that. I thought, okay, well, there's not much I can do. So I go through the whole thing. I do an assessment of what it's going to cost me to repair all of these apartments, right? And catch up in the back mortgage payments that he kept that he didn't pay. Well, he kept the rents. And I looked at that, I'm like, literally they're worth maybe $400,000 or $500,000, and it's going to cost me at least $200,000 to $300,000. And at 19, 20 years old, I didn't have that kind of cash. I didn't have anything close to that. I was in a real pickle. So here I've got these big dreams of grandeur. I've got this other big 30, 40 story building I'm working on. And all of a sudden now my credit is trashed. My credit is destroyed. And so I have no other choice to let them all foreclose. So I went back to talk to the lawyer. Here's what's interesting. I think he knew what his liability was because now he refused to see me. He's like, yeah, no, I can't take you on as a client anymore. I thought, interesting. You were willing to charge me top dollar to do this bad advice with the land contract. But now that I'm a little older and I've kind of seen how that system works, I figured it out. He didn't want the continued liability. So I went to another lawyer, and the lawyer basically says, you're in a pickle, man. Said, there's no way a bank is ever going to work with you. There's no way the developer's ever going to work with you. There's no way, and you don't have the cash to even start this other project. I said, well, what the heck do I do? He said, let them all foreclose. I said, that's going to kill my credit. He goes, look, he goes, you got to make a financial decision. You either come out of pocket $200,000 to $300,000. Now we're talking like in the mid 80s. That is today millions, right? Maybe $2 to $3 million, or you take a bad credit rating for 7 years. And he said, you just won't be able to buy any real estate if you're going to take a regular mortgage. I said, oh my gosh. Now, I did buy additional real estate, and I did it all with owner financing, but it was not easy because even with owner financing, they ask for your credit report, right? So I had to suck it up. I was 20, 21 years old, everything. And keep in mind, I did a lot of this work myself. I just didn't understand. There was apartments where I ripped down the drywall, I rewired. I wasn't so good at plumbing, but I let other people plumb. I wasn't so good at mudding. I let other people sometimes mud, but I rip it down. I put up the new drywall, let somebody come in and do the finishing touches. So I probably do 70 to 80%. I do all the kitchens over. So I had a lot of sweat equity in these properties. And let me tell you, that is a killer. You put all that time, all that effort in, and it just goes up in smoke. So for those people that sit there and go, oh, real estate's the best investment, it's the safest investment. No, it's not. Not only can you lose your original money that you put in, unlike a stock, just like a stock, you can lose a lot more. If there's a liability, if there's massive repairs, you can lose more than what your original investment is if you don't know what you're doing. So how did I lose $19 million? So there's two calculations that I love to run every once in a while. These calculations keep me in check. When I say that is a lesson learned that is not remembered is going to repeat itself. Let me repeat that. A lesson learned or a lesson not learned is going to repeat itself again. Those that cannot remember, those that do not remember the past will repeat it again, right? Something like that. You know what I mean? So I look at this every once in a while. Now, the other calculation off this topic is my grandfather was a pretty wealthy guy when he died, and all the money that was in his estate got lost. Well, it didn't get lost. It went to another family because of a faulty trust. So today, if I looked back when I was 16 years old and he died, had the money been given to me like it was planned, that would be worth somewhere between 42 to 48 million dollars today. Now, adding on to that, the real estate, if I take a look at what that approximate value was when I sold it to Mike, I think that was how 85, 86, 1985, 1986, and you just use average real estate appreciation, it would be worth about $19 million today. So calculating the losses from Ken's, well, not Ken's all mistakes. The real estate was definitely my mistake due to the lack of my experience, due to my immaturity, my lack of understanding risk, and more than anything else, my lack of understanding who I was working with. Had I known more about Mike, not just wanted to sell for a profit, I would have recognized what those risks were. But if you add up the close to $20 million that real estate would be worth today, and I added up what that my grandfather's inheritance would be worth today, I'd be sitting on $70 million, close to it, right? Those are some pretty massive mistakes. So, what is the lesson that you can take away from this? First, number one, real estate is not passive. It's a bricks and mortar business. That's the way to look at it. With a bricks and mortar business, you have a lot of liability. You have the cost, the capital, the renters, the repairs, and then you get into other things. Like I was sued on a property because somebody said that they slipped and fell on the ice on the sidewalk, and the insurance company at that time refused to cover me until I sued them. I had another situation where we bought a house and we found out there was lead paint, there was asbestos, there was lead pipes. I literally had to just rip the house down because I didn't know that. I bought it at auction. There was another, well, I told you about the time with the fire. So there is a lot of liability. So lesson one, real estate is not passive. Number two, you got to buy big enough so that you can mitigate the risks by hiring people that know what they're doing to handle and manage the real estate. Number three is, and here's my biggest mistake, what I should not have done is sold it. What I should have done is I should have refinanced all of those rental properties. I should have pulled my equity out. Then what I should have done is bought the bigger number of doors. So thanks for joining today, and hopefully my mistakes on growing wealth will prevent you from making the same mistakes. And hey, by the way, since you're watching this on YouTube, just a real quick note, if you could do me a favor, please hit subscribe, like, subscribe, and click on a comment. Throw a comment in there. Here's why. We're trying to ramp up as much education as we can to you, and the more likes and subscribes we get, the bigger our production can get, and the more education I can give to you. So thank you for doing that. And join me next time for maybe some opportunity ideas or maybe more examples of the mistakes that I've made that you don't have to make again.